Does third-party content drive results in LLMs much more than your own site content? There's one more narrative that kind of ties into this self-promotional listicle not working, which is the GEO side of it. There's a lot of people that are making the argument that if you write these articles on your own site, that it doesn't have the same effectiveness in terms of getting brand mentions in any of the LLMs as, let's say, publishing these on third-party sites. And from what we're seeing, that's just not true.
LLMs, their actual recommendation list, the mentions in their generated output, are not necessarily from the sources. We have internal data we are still working on in a study that we have yet to publish that is supporting what some people are saying online, that there is decent evidence that suggests these LLMs make a list based on a loose reading of the SERP, which we don't know how much they factor that in, and their own training data, their own understanding of that space already, and then find sources to support that after the fact.
We just got done recording a podcast about self-promotional listicles and how it's affecting SEO. And in the second half of that conversation, we dove really deep into, does third-party content drive results in LLMs much more than your own site content? And so that's what we're going to discuss in this episode. There's one more narrative that kind of ties into this self-promotional listicle not working, which is the GEO side of it. There's a lot of people that are making the argument that if you write these articles on your own site, that it doesn't have the same effectiveness in terms of getting brand mentions in any of the LLMs as, let's say, publishing these on third-party sites. And so like a big thing that people are doing right now is they're producing a bunch of these same like more scammy listicles, and they're just trying to get them published everywhere. And they're making the case that this is really what drives GEO. And again, they're saying that if you have content on your own site, that LLMs don't pay attention to the content on your own site anymore. It's all about what other people are saying about you. And from what we're seeing, that's just not true. Like we have counter examples to like pretty much every case here. So I want to talk through, well, first of all, this narrative came from a post I saw on LinkedIn last week from the AirOps team, well, actually the CEO at AirOps, where he references this and like I believe the agency Graphite's studies where they say third-party sources drive 85% of brand discovery, basically saying that third-party content is what's influencing brand mentions in LLMs, and your own site content is only, I guess, influencing 15% of that, something like that. I take issue to this overall as just like a narrative that third-party sites are driving the majority of brand mentions. And I think this, like the issue I take is if you look at the methodology, I think what happens is if you look at a big site like, let's say, Peloton or Salesforce, and you look at just some of their top software queries, like for Salesforce, it would be like best CRM software, or if you look at Peloton, it would be like best exercise bike. And you don't see citations from that company for that query, it would lead you to believe that there's something external that's driving the brand mention for those businesses. But in reality, from what we look at, in these really competitive industries, there's just really large brands, and you don't necessarily need your own site content to basically drive the awareness that Salesforce is one of the top CRM tools, or that Peloton is one of the top exercise bikes. It's just kind of known because there are a ton of other sites talking about these companies and saying that these are some of the best options. But I think where this gets challenging is like, what do you do if you're a smaller business? Like, what do you do if you are the Toro TMS that's just starting off in trucking management software? Like, you read this kind of study and then you immediately come to the conclusion that our content strategy needs to be getting all these other sites in the transportation industry talking about Toro instead of producing our own content. And it's just not true. That's not what we see. And specifically, if I were to, I can pull up our tracker for a couple of clients here, and we can show that.
By the way, as you pull that up, a couple notes. LLMs don't necessarily recommend, their actual recommendation list, the mentions in their generated output, are not necessarily from the sources. We have internal data are still working on in a study that we have yet to publish that is supporting what some people are saying online, that there is decent evidence that suggests these LLMs make a list based on a loose reading of the SERP, which we don't know how much they factor that in, and their own training data, their own understanding of that space already, and then find sources to support that after the fact. So like, it's not entirely certain. Number two, so from what I understanding of that AirOps study, and I got to look into it more, it looks like basically they're saying if the citation is like in, let's say, ChatGPT's response, where ChatGPT in a bullet list says like grow and convert, and then cites that article, that it's saying that ChatGPT from that article decided to mention grow and convert. But one, I don't think anybody in the world knows exactly how that works.
Yeah,
We don't know.
Like
We're not OpenAI's engineers, and I'm not sure OpenAI's engineers know because it's so complicated. And number two, we and others have started to find evidence that is suggesting, and I need to speak very carefully here because I don't want to say the wrong thing, and we're still working on this. Specifically, Caitlin on our team had been working on this. And she had said, I'm starting to sort of believe, based on the data I'm seeing, what some of these other people are saying, which is I think it might just find sources after the fact to support what it wants to say from its training data.
I mean, I remember chatting about this with you last year. I remember like walking down the street when I was in Greece, and we were having this deep conversation about how LLMs work. And
oh, that sounds really cool. I guarantee you I was not walking down the street in Greece. I was sitting at my desk in San Jose.
yeah, but I remember like vividly having this conversation that like the LLMs, when they're running searches, they're trying to like validate information. So they might have so if someone asks a question, they're looking for an answer, and then they're just like running a search to validate that answer.
Yeah.
So they're looking for like the most probabilistic answer, and then they're checking other references to make sure that answer is correct.
Right.
Is like generally like how we think it works. Again, the nuances of like what sites it's pulling from, or like the domain authority, or like how it's referencing certain sites, we just don't know yet. But essentially that's how it's working.
I will say, to give it credit, 100%, you're going to show examples where, for our own client, we have clients in a space where they themselves don't have like incumbent level brand awareness. We've published the content. It's one of the most cited content in the topic that you're going to show in Traqer in a second. And they're getting a bunch of brand mentions. It looks, again, we also can't do what I'm claiming they can't do and be like, I have definitive proof of exactly how the LLMs recommend stuff. Nobody has that.
For sure.
Nobody has that. But I mean, just look at it. Like, it's like, would you publish more of this content? I would. Like, it's like
Yeah.
It looks pretty convincing. Now,
and I'm not even going to argue that third-party content does not help drive
Right.
brand mentions. Like,
Yeah.
I'm not making that case. What I'm making the case against is that your own site content doesn't influence LLMs, and that kind of seems to be a popular narrative that's forming, is that like all of the weight of LLMs should be focused on third-party content because third-party content trusts other site content more. Like it's like LLMs see your own site as biased, so they're not going to reference any of the information on your own site, is kind of what this is alluding to.
You're right.
And that's what I take issue with. That's just not true. It's like almost the best source of information about a company is their own website, because they're able to put out their own sales material and reasoning for why you should work with that company. And I think the third-party content, when an LLM is trying to validate that answer and they see the same kind of answer and positioning across a number of different sites, yes, that helps them validate that the answer that they found on your own site or wherever site that they were first referencing is correct. Like, that's how I think the third-party content definitely helps you. But here we can see for our client Climb Hire, like this got brought up on our video with Bernard, that he didn't think that, like, for specifically Gemini's model wouldn't mention your brand if you were also cited as a source.
And
And
or he might have mentioned it in inverse, that for the brands it's deciding to say to mention or list in its like text output, it doesn't cite them. I forget which direction he
yeah,
said it, but both directions seem to be true.
but either way, like here we have a counterpoint of that where Climb High, and even on that video, we showed how we were listed as a top content marketing agency for Gemini, and we were also the #1 cited source. And it's the same thing here. So Climb Hire is mentioned, and they also have one of the top cited sources. And you can also just see how this is true across multiple LLMs where they're cited and they have a brand mention. And so that's just showing you that to some extent, your on-site content does influence the LLM answers. And there's also cases where you, like, we have the opposite, where we're mentioned here, or like we're cited, but we don't have a brand mention.
Yeah.
So you can't say one works better than the other. Like, do we know the exact reason why Climb Hire's getting brand mentions for this topic area and this one doesn't? We don't. But what we can say is that both of these things are influential. I wouldn't say one is 85% more important than the other. I think they're both equally important, and they can affect LLMs in different ways. And beyond that, something else we're going to do a little bit more research on is just what we're seeing is that each of the LLMs here, they also work differently. Like, we're seeing a lot higher numbers in Perplexity, AIO, and AI mode across all of our clients than we are for Gemini and ChatGPT. And so what we think is that they work retrieving information in different ways, and different tactics influence the LLM's answers. And so people are coming across with these universal, this is how LLMs work. And what we're trying to say is, like, that's not really true, because they all work differently. If they all worked the same way, you would have the same averages across every single LLM.
Yeah,
And
specifically, it looks
so,
like there's two buckets. The Perplexity, AIO, and AI mode are more search-based. And you can see in Climb Hire that our brand or mention visibility percentage for Perplexity, AIO, and AI mode are 86%, 80%, 82%. Whereas it looks like the pure LLMs, ChatGPT and Gemini, well, you moved to a different screen, so I can't mention, but it was in like the 30 and 50%
yeah.
range. Because it seems like those weight their training data more, whereas Perplexity, AIO, and AI Overview seem to just be more like search-based, like search summarizer type LLMs. And so
And
that matters.
it does. And I want to come up with another hypothesis here, because so Toro and Climb Hire, before we started working with them, I don't think had done a ton in marketing. And we can see that for both of these companies, they have a pretty decent amount of brand mentions. Like, this is really high. Toro, we only started with a year ago. Climb Hire, we started 2 or 3 years ago. And on both of these accounts, they're getting a really good amount of leads from different LLMs. And so to say that your own site content doesn't influence this is just like purely wrong, because here's an example where that's pretty much all we've done for them. Like, we've started doing some citation outreach in the last 2 months, but they even had this visibility way before we started doing any of that work. And so it's just showing you that your own site content really can influence brand mentions. And I think my hypothesis is that when you get to really competitive categories, it's going to take a lot more to influence a brand mention than it is where there's not a lot of good content or good information in these less competitive categories. When we first started with Toro, when we did like a competitive analysis of the different content and the keywords that we wanted to go after, a lot of the content was old, it wasn't good, and we just produced really good content in the trucking management space. And we've started getting a ton of brand mentions just because I think the content is truly better than a lot of the other stuff out there. And there's not a lot of options from third-party sites or just from anything about this category. And same thing with Climb Hire. Like, They do something very specific. And so I think writing really good content about what they do helped influence search a lot more, both on the Google side and the LLM side. Now, when you get into content marketing agency, when you get into CRM, when you get into best exercise bikes, those are really competitive categories. And there's tons of content that exists online about these different industries. And I think just writing your own content, if no one else is mentioning you, is going to be a lot harder to influence the results in those categories. Same thing in SEO. I could make the same argument. The same argument would be if you're writing SEO blog posts going after best SEO tools and you have one article and you have a few links going to it, good luck ranking in that top position, because Ahrefs and ClearScope and all these different tools probably have hundreds of links. They have a really strong domain that all talks about this. It's the same thing. More competitive categories are going to be harder to get rankings in. And I think it's the same thing here, where more competitive categories that have tons of content about different companies in the space are just going to be much harder to influence than categories where there's just less competition and less good content.
Yeah. Last thing I'm going to say. Our posts recently, 2 of them, invisible prompts and topic-based GEO, outline another reason why on-site content is really important, which is the details. And we outline that. You can Google invisible prompts, or maybe we can put it in the show notes, and topic-based GEO. But basically what they say is, these studies often have this artificialness to it, where what they're doing is they're creating these like simple prompts, best CRM or whatever, and then they're looking and analyzing the results and being like, look, this is cited or whatever. The reality is the real users, number one, most of them don't type in a short phrase like that. They're having a long conversation. How do we know? Because we've asked the people who found us, our clients who found us on ChatGPT, send us a chat. And actually, just, you don't need to believe me, just look at your own usage of LLMs. Number two, if you type that short phrase, give me the best CRMs, into an incognito version of ChatGPT, it has no contextual history. But if a real user types it in, it knows everything about them from all the previous chats. And so what it's doing, as we argue in those posts, is it's recommending the products it decides to recommend are based on really specific matching of the product features and solutions and benefits and strengths to specific details of the user's needs that it knows. And our argument in those posts is your content on your site gives you the room, the canvas, to be able to outline the specific use cases, pain points, situations, customer types, blah, 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 where you shine. And just like a mention from some, offshore commenter on Reddit that you hired is not going to have that nuance. It can have a little bit, but it's not going to have that. So just giving like quick mentions on other sites, you have like 2 sentences or maybe a phrase. Whereas in your site, you can go into the detail of it. And we provide in one or both of those articles an example of a chat that our existing client actually sent us, that they had with ChatGPT, where it recommended us. And it says in there, look, Grow and Convert has published case studies showing this and that amount of lead generation. You can't provide that kind of detail for her just on a Reddit strategy. So that's another sort of qualitative reason why your own content is really important.
If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe. You can also get the audio-only versions of these shows wherever you get your podcasts. And you can follow us at growandconvert.com/newsletter for any articles and updates for when these videos come out.